It's too late to fight back now. We are going to wipe you out like the vermin you are.
So this was a pleasant surprise. We are talking Vampires versus the Bronx. And this is kind of like the Monster Squad meets Fright Night for the new generation. So what's the story? Well, obviously it takes place in the Bronx, and it's kind of an allegory for gentrification as this kind of neighborhood is getting swallowed up by this property developer with a somewhat familiar logo. And it's up to this kind of like trio of local kids to try and kind of stand up and stop this kind of like this company taking over the neighbourhood ultimately and driving people out. However, little do we know that this property development company is actually a front for this kind of vampire nest, and they are buying up the properties to make their own and expand their kind of vampire empire. Obviously, these two sides will clash, and what will happen, you have to watch the movie to find out. So let's first of all talk about what worked. Okay, to be honest with you, I have to say with the title, I was a little bit put off. I thought, this is going to be just, cheesy rubbish. But this movie I really enjoyed. It really, to me, captures that fun feeling that you got, as I've mentioned, from movies like The Monster Squad, the Fright Night series, which I really love. It's my favourite kind of film. But also, I would say elements from The Lost Boys to a lesser degree, and also the more recent movie Attack the Block. And these kind of elements are there, but it kind of makes it a real fun kind of like romp. It's not a particularly horrific film in any way. It's kind of more of the lines of a family horror film, or maybe kind of like, at least, sort of teen audience, really. I mean, very much, I guess, like the original Monster Squad to a certain degree. But I thought the tone of this movie was just really fun, and it obviously has some kind of underlying messages. Obviously, as I say, the kind of the parallels with gentrification in real life. It also speaks to kind of like communities and things like that, and how communities should sort of stick together, stuff like this. And how this kind of the vampires represent this kind of the external corporate force, so to speak. So all those themes are there, but they don't kind of overpower the film, I feel. I have seen some critiques that this film is too political, but I've got to say, I didn't think that. I felt this movie, it has those elements there, but it's subtle enough that you can kind of like, it doesn't hit you over the head, and you can just enjoy it for the film with kind of these subtle messages really just playing in the background. Next now, we've got to talk about the cast here. I have to say, I thought our trio of young heroes, we have a fourth member that kind of joins a little later, I thought all did a great job. They're really likeable kids with distinct personalities, and I thought they did an excellent job of making for really likeable protagonists, and you'll be rooting for these guys. And I love them. I love their relationship with the other people as well. I like their relationships with the parents and stuff like that. You'll see a few familiar faces. Probably the biggest one I would say is Zoe Saldana, but she's only in one scene. But there are a couple of other familiar faces who you'll see here. The vampire's not quite as well realised, we'll come on to that, but nonetheless, I thought the character work here was all quite fun. It's also steeped in some really cool vampire lore, and I have to say I appreciated some of the nods here to previous vampire mythology. Interestingly, I would say this has somewhat of a Marvel connection. Obviously, I've mentioned Zoe Saldana, who was in Guardians of the Galaxy. But this movie heavily references Blade, the original Blade film, of which we see a few clips of, where these kids are watching it and obviously very much influenced it, and like it. And I think our main character would make a great Miles Morales in a kind of obviously a live-action kind of Spider-Man, retelling with that sort of character, with that sort of version of Spider-Man. These guys are obviously very much influenced by Blade, of course, starring the famous Wesley Snipes. But I thought those kind of influences were good, and it adds a few more things to the kind of the vampire or the bubbling of the holy water when a vampire is near, to kind of use that as an early detection that sort of thing. Thought it was good. I actually thought the vampire makeup was pretty good, and like the way that they kind of played this sort of like old European sort of style aristocratic vampires. I thought that was quite fun. The production value looks very high. I think that the pacing is very good. And all around, it's just a fun movie. So what don't I like? Okay, so I think maybe there is some issues with the vampires themselves. They are somewhat underdeveloped, maybe by design, because obviously they're kept obviously in the shadows, but both literally and we don't know much about them. But I do feel that they could have been a little bit more fleshed out, and we only really sort of see two of them and to any great detail. The other ones are just cannon fodder. I do have a couple of other issues with them. I think there are scenes towards the end where we see the vampires fly, and I've got to say those scenes looked very weak. It just looked like someone was being hoisted up off the ground. It really looked quite awkward. That's the one area where I felt like the production looked particularly kind of cheap. But also, I've got to say, I think the vampires seemed incredibly easy to kill. Considering that we're meant to believe that they're this kind of like unstoppable force, they seem to be taken out with relative ease. And I think when you couple that with really not much characterization from the kind of the vampires, it doesn't make them particularly threatening to a certain degree, which is a shame. And it does kind of leave the door open for more adventures. There's talk of, greater vampires, shall we say, but so that we have that opportunity to kind of maybe revisit this world. Whether they do it is obviously, I don't know, who knows, but I would certainly like it. And I've got to say, I think the third act may be the weakest. I think the confrontation, it does seem derivative of other vampire properties, and not quite as strong as the character work that has led up to that point, and the kind of like the story mystery that kind of goes with it. It's not bad, the third act, but I don't think it's certainly the weaker out of the three acts here, purely because it just seems somewhat generic, shall we say. Overall, though, I really, really enjoyed this film. It was such a fun watch, such a fun surprise. Because to be honest with you, I really wasn't expecting a hell of a lot. The title really put me off of this one. It just seemed like it would be just a bit crap because of that. But I was so pleased that I actually watched it. I would recommend this one. I'll give it a 7 out of 10. I was thinking maybe an 8, but maybe having sort of spoken out loud about my critiques of that, I think maybe I'll say a 7, because I do think there are maybe the vampires were a little bit of a missed opportunity to a certain degree. I think they look good, the makeup-wise, but they could have been a bit more done with them. So I will go with 7 out of 10. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment, and I shall look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.